Hello, Kathy Myhre here, and I want to talk with you today about fear and anxiety. And of course, by now you know the first thing I'm going to say is that both anxiety and fear are normal human responses. But did you know that in some cases they can be healthy? Like healthy fear about somebody breaking in to our home can motivate us to get a Ring doorbell. This is healthy fear is why most of us have insurance policies on our car and our house. And so fear can be really motivating for us to take care of ourselves and the people we love and the things we value. And the same thing with anxiety. Lower levels of anxiety, like on a scale from 0 to 10, anxiety at a 1 or a 2 can be very adaptive, especially if I'm preparing for a message I'm going to give, or if I have a big project at work. Lower levels of anxiety motivates me to dot my I's and cross my T's and do my research and prepare well. It's just when anxiety and fear get to higher levels that they become unhealthy. And as a matter of fact, they increase the levels of cortisols, which are the stress hormones in our body, which can inhibit lymphocyte production and drop our immunity to all kinds of viruses going around and even nasty things like cancer. So learning how to manage anxiety is super important. And the 3 ways that most of us initially turn to manage anxiety, and I'm not suggesting these are healthy, would be addiction, drinking, having a couple of beers, smoking some cannabis, any kind of addictive behavior to help us manage the stress and anxiety. But those coping strategies, as most of us well know, can lead to a whole new set of problems. So they're not necessarily healthy ways. But the second way that most of us will try to manage anxiety will be through avoidance. We avoid the things that make us nervous, and that can really limit our life, because we all have certain gifts and talents and capabilities that are just below the surface of our consciousness, just waiting to be discovered. And how we discover them is by pressing against some of the natural boundaries of comfort that we have. I think of the first time I ever preached. I was working at New Life as an associate pastor, and our senior pastor walked by my office, I think it was Wednesday, and said, "You're on deck Sunday." And I laughed at him and said, "Oh, I'd rather you just stab me in the stomach with a knife and twist it." And he goes, "I'm sorry, Kathy, did that sound like it was negotiable?" And so I was thrust into something that, of course, I was really nervous. And then therein discovered that I had a gift that I didn't even know I had. So avoidance can really limit our life. And then the third way that we try to manage anxiety is through control. We try to control things oftentimes that we have no control over, and that can really impact our relationships in some unhealthy ways. And it can just serve to increase the anxiety. And so when I'm treating people with higher levels of anxiety and fear, and of course, just like depression, there can be genetic predispositions for anxiety. And then most of the time, no, there are real reasons why we're feeling anxious. And we treat depression very cautiously and gently, but we treat anxiety rather aggressively because it's a bully that can rob your life. So there's many different forms of anxiety. There's panic, which some of us feel, which is very physiological and scary when it's happening. And what I encourage people is to talk back to the panic, talk back to the fear, and Just like when I was younger, I used to surf on the Southern California beaches. Now, don't get too impressed, none of the big waves or anything like that, and I was not very good. But any surfer will tell you that if you're paddling toward a wave and it looks like you're not going to be able to catch it, you know, you don't try to go away from it, because then it will crash on top of you, and your board will hit you and it won't be fun. So you just paddle as fast as you can toward it, and sometimes you can catch it and that's a sweet ride. Other times, if it just looks like, no, I'm not going to catch it, you just unclip your board, dive underneath it, and then go retrieve your board. So you want to go into the anxiety actually and stand up to it. And so what I tell people is to, you know, when you're having a panic attack, think about what your body is experiencing. And if you've ever worked out a little bit too hard at the gym and you hit that anaerobic level, it's actually the same symptoms. So the first thing I say to panic is, you can't hurt me. Second thing, you're not going to last, because a panic attack is usually between 5 and 20 minutes. And the third thing is, you're not the boss of me. So I encourage people to do anything physically during a panic attack. Tug their ear, pat themselves, to show the panic that, no, this is still my body. And switching to deep diaphragmatic breathing and stretching during panic will truncate it as well. And breathing deeply from your diaphragm to the count of 3, and then exhaling slowly to the count of 5 to trigger that parasympathetic system. And then there are phobias, and these are things that when we're exposed to them, we feel high anxiety. We call those triggers, and they can be trauma related or something that we were exposed to. I used to be deathly afraid of bees, and there's a story there that I can't get into now. But so with that, we want exposure. And so we want to be able to manage our anxiety as we get closer and closer to that thing that we're afraid of. And then finally, for most of us, we experience anxiety and fear as worry. And we experience it mostly in our head. And so I have a couple of rules. So if what you're afraid of is, to ask yourself, is the thing I'm worrying about something I can control or something I can't? Most of the time it's something you can't. And so if it's something you can't, then we want to ask ourselves the next question. If that thing were to happen, how would I want to be able to handle it? What would I want to be able to do about it? And I think about a woman who I worked with years and years ago who was really worrying about her son's girlfriend. They had moved in together, and she noticed some really negative changes in her son when he started dating this girl. And she could tell they were getting closer, and so her fear was, what if they get married and she wants them to move to North Carolina where her family is? Then my grandkids are going to grow up on the other side of the country and I'm not going to have a relationship with them. A real significant fear. And so is that something she has control over? Not at all. So I began to help her to problem solve. If that were to happen, what would she want to do? And she came up with some really creative ideas. She said, Kathy, I would want to get out there to visit a couple times a year. And I wouldn't want to be a burden, so I'd want to stay in a hotel. And so she decided to get a part-time job. She was an empty nester. And she decided that she was going to create a little slush fund, a little traveling fund. And that actually did happen. They actually did get married, and she changed her heart. She said, I would want to order my heart in a way where I would be a blessing to this young woman and establish relationship. And she felt so much better when she realized and focused on the things that she could control. So those are some real quick tips on how to manage anxiety and fear. Take care.